Good morning, good night, good everything in between. Welcome to Literary Ramblings. I am one of your co-hosts, Corrie, and this is my incredible co-host, Charlotte.
Hi.
This is the
I'm
podcast. This is the podcast where Charlotte and I read a book together, monthly-ish, and then we discuss it and we talk about it. So we go back and forth with our book picks. Call it our little book club. Last month was my pick, and I didn't like it. And this month was Charlotte's pick, and I'm not sure I liked this one either. Charlotte, tell us about your pick this month.
So this was A Green Journey, which is by John Hassler, and it's not exactly a sequel, but it is part of a series that he has set in Staggerford, Minnesota. And the previous one, I believe, was more about like the town and other inhabitants, but this one focuses on a woman named Agatha, who is kind of close to retirement age and evaluating her life, and it's about her interactions with other people in the town, which eventually leads to them going on a trip to Ireland and having an adventure. That's the green journey part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the quote on the front says, "A novel to restore your faith in humanity," which I think is a little bit overblown, I gotta say.
Okay, yeah, that was like a really. I remember I was kind of depressed when we talked about starting this book,
Yes.
and I remember reading that and like I don't think I like visibly gagged, but I think I felt it like in my heart that I like gagged at that line because I was like, "There's absolutely no way." I was like going through a very rough time about a month ago,
I
so
mean,
you know,
yeah, and like I would call it an uplifting story, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it restored my faith in humanity.
I don't
So,
think it talks enough about humanity to do that. I mean, because
mm,
we just follow like the 5 6 characters. It's not like anybody in this book went off and they like got like a great crowd of people to like
mm,
do to like raise $10 million for cancer research or something. It was really just it's a very tight book.
mhm.
It's very tightly focused.
Yeah, yeah, a very small scope, focused on a small town and that group of people.
Yep.
And he did a really good job building settings, I think.
Um, I am torn on that comment. What year was this written?
Uh,
1985. So
yeah.
I have discovered through reading this book that I actually have a hard time with things set in the not so distant past.
Mm,
And I think that it's because I read a decent amount of fantasy. And if you don't give me enough context clues to like remind me that we're in like essentially the 20th century, then I will like legitimately forget. Especially when you go someplace that's like very old, like Ireland, and you're
mhm.
talking about all these like stone buildings and like all the old churches and stuff, and I'm just like, wow, yeah, so like this is medieval times, and it'll be like this lady was clicking her ballpoint pen, and I'm like, oh right, forgot. And I know that's like a me problem, but the descriptions and stuff are very pretty, but a lot of the descriptions made me forget that this was a more modern book because they are very poetic.
Mhm. Yeah, and it did feel like in Ireland things moved really slow. So, as far as like
Yeah.
there's a lot of travel time, and it wasn't like when we talked about an Inkheart where it was like super boring and long or something, but it was just enough that it made it feel like it was taking them lots of time to get places, which feels weird in like the modern
Yeah.
era. So,
Yeah.
and they didn't have cell
And the
phones.
fact that yeah, but they had phones. And they'd
Mhm.
be like, "Oh, I gotta track down this person's address and stuff." And I'm like, imagine just because Agatha goes over with a tour group, but then she's not gonna like take the actual tour in
Mhm.
Ireland, and so then she ends up just going off on her own, and she even like leaves the hotel that like she was supposed to stay at, that the tour
Mhm.
group is staying at, because she bought like half the tour package to go over to
Yeah.
Ireland. So she's going over there. She has the hotel that the tour group would have also had, and then she'll fly back with them. But she's not part of the tour for the couple weeks that they're there. And she
Yeah.
just leaves the hotel. She just checks out and goes and checks into another hotel. And I was like, I cannot fathom. doing that and like not telling anybody where I was going.
Yeah.
I like at work, I will like literally tell my boss, I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna go to lunch and then I'm gonna go do this assignment and I'm gonna do this thing and then I will be back. Because and like anytime I go off, so I am working as a reporter, so sometimes I have to drive places to go and talk to people. And I put all of the addresses and all of the information I possibly can, first and last names, into the calendar on my work computer so that somebody knows where I am. And it was just such a weird thing to read. It's such a like 1980s thing
It is.
where
I
nobody knows
mean,
who you are.
yeah, people talk about that. They're like, oh, yeah, we used to just take our bikes and no one would know where we'd go and we'd come back for dinner. Like, you just
Yeah.
didn't know where people were.
That's
Which,
just a foreign concept to me, especially in another country, like in a
well,
foreign country. I know it's Ireland, so it's not like they were going to like the jungles of Africa or something, but like
well,
somewhere that you're not totally familiar with things and everything. It's just
and to be
crazy.
fair, Ireland, even in this period, wasn't that safe. I mean, there's literally like a
Yeah,
bombing happens while they're there because of the IRA and
yeah,
all that turmoil, which
yeah,
you don't really hear about much anymore, but I assume the conflict is still kind of just simmering over there. So,
probably. Yeah, no, I didn't know anything about it.
oh, I've seen like the movie In the Name of the Father, which is actually a really good movie. Is about an IRA bombing. Probably not the best source for like actual
Yeah,
historical
yeah. Take it with a
information.
grain of salt, you know.
Yeah, but it's pretty heated over there. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
anyway, yeah, the idea of
Uh,
just like I'm gonna leave and not tell anyone where I am.
yeah. She just went, and I was like, that's kind of cool. And then at the same time, I'm like, also terrifying. I could never do that. I also don't really like doing things by myself either. So
Mm.
like, I don't know. If I was in her shoes, I would probably just wallow in self pity in my new hotel room,
I mean,
and I would just
I I wouldn't say
sit.
that
But
I
I
like
probably wouldn't have gone to Ireland anyway.
see, so you wouldn't have been there in the first place. Agatha seems very independent, and I like to do things on my own, but I also like to do them more with a group. So I could
Hmm.
see myself. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd go as far as switching hotels. That's a lot. But yeah.
Yeah, and
So
she did it just to avoid the tour group.
hmm
So
yeah. When and so the interesting thing about Agatha is like she's lived in Staggerford most of her life, all of her life, I think. Right?
the vast majority, at least, she's been teaching for over 20 years.
Yeah. So
So I
she
would say
didn't
most of her life, I'm pretty sure.
yeah, so she like knows these people pretty well. They're all members of her community who are going on this trip to Ireland. And yet she's not very close with any of them. Like I don't know, she's kind of a lonely figure in this book. And, you know,
Hmm.
she seems to like being alone, but like her one friend Lillian, who is just her neighbor, like they're not really good friends. Like they probably wouldn't be friends except they've been neighbors like their whole life type thing.
Hmm.
So, so I guess it's not that surprising that Agatha just goes off by herself because the next person she's probably closest with is Jenny, who's this young girl who she helped as a single mom when she was giving birth to her child. And they just have such different like life experiences and stuff that they're not necessarily peers, you know.
Yeah, it's Janet, right? That's who you're
Oh,
talking about.
Janet. Yep. Not Jenny.
Which is how the book starts. The book
Hmm.
starts with Janet's father dropping Janet off at Agatha McGee's house the night before Christmas because Janet lives out in the middle of nowhere and Agatha lives in town. So when she's very, very pregnant, and so they want her close to the hospital, so Agatha agreed to let Janet stay with her until the baby was born,
Hmm.
which she does, and that's the first couple chapters of the book.
Yeah. And I was also very surprised by that because of the title, and I was like, why is this book starting at Christmas time if it's a green journey?
Yeah, it doesn't stay there for super long. It is a very slow moving book, in my opinion, but it's because you get treated to like the absolute minutia of country living in this town.
Yep.
It's just like you get every detail. Like every single character gets like you get to learn their entire backstory and just like really weird little details about them, which tell a lot about their characters, but at the same time, I found it to be very grating by the end. Especially like Charlotte had more fun reading this once they get to Ireland, but I had much less fun because then I had to listen to these people talk about the IRA and all these like this murder that happened,
Oh, yeah.
and
I wasn't really interested in
it was
that.
just it was just constant nothingness. And I was like, can we move on with our lives? And then even the characters themselves are like, these people are boring. Like, why did you write this way?
That's true, actually. Janet does. She gets like bored of the people she's staying with, and it's like, well, why did you pick these people to put Janet with then?
Yeah. And it's like, I understand like having boring characters in your book, but that family takes up so much space in this book.
Yeah,
Like they take up way too much space considering how boring they are
yeah,
and how uninteresting all of their conversations are.
yeah. I agree, actually. Randy's family is the main problem in this book, really.
Yeah, they're super boring. And also Randy, I would say, is a tragic character.
He is.
And we talked about this a little bit once we were both finished with the book. So Randy is Janet's husband. Agatha didn't like Randy. Randy clearly is displayed as having depression.
Yes.
So he goes through manic episodes and he goes through, I can't remember, I guess they're just depressive episodes. So he goes up and down a lot throughout this book. And he's not a main character. You do get his perspective towards the end of the book, but he's not even like, he's not diagnosed with depression. It's just very, very obvious that he has depression. And you go through all these ups and downs with him and Janet for a little while, and then towards the end it seems like it's going to go up again, so he's kind of in like a better mood. But like for me, as someone who like knows at least a little bit about depression, I'm like, this does not mean anything to me because he's been manic and depressive this entire book, and now all of a sudden he's going through another high, and it's like, but he doesn't get any like actual help.
No.
Nothing actually changes really like in his life. Like he kind of has a renewed sense of purpose, but at the same time it's like, how long is that really going to last? He's gone through those before.
Yeah, he makes some better decisions at the end of the book. I think the implication being that like he's more figured out how to actually be a salesperson, which is what he's been trying to be kind of the entire book and failing at.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree that it doesn't necessarily seem sustainable. And I also just felt like the ending where it ended, they don't even reunite with Janet, and I was just kind of like, you can't give me that. You can't. I mean, I know it's a little cliche, but like I want to just see them reunite as a family. And by the way, Randy is not the father of the baby. She met him later, so he's but he's been like good to Steven and stuff, which is nice. I mean, he seems like a good person. He's just his depression.
I just don't believe it. I think that if we had been able to, because the book basically ends with Randy and Steven driving to pick up Janet at the airport. Well, Janet and Agatha, because they'll drive back together, and that's fine. But if I would believe it a lot more if we could have seen them reunite and could have been in both Randy and maybe Janet's head too, and maybe if Janet was like, "Wow, I've never actually seen him like this." Because she's seen him through all the highs and lows. Yeah. And if she could say something like, "Oh, wow, this seems like real change," I would definitely more believe that he has come out of those issues at least a little bit more.
But we don't. A great point. Yeah.
But we don't.
She knows
and
him
so
best.
I'm extremely skeptical, which obviously these are fictional characters, but I did like most of them just fine. They felt very real.
Yeah, that's definitely the high point of the book is the characterization and his ability to make them feel like real people.
Yeah. Okay. So we haven't really talked about the plot. There's not a lot of plot in this book because it's character driven. So but we meet Agatha and we meet all the characters, and that takes a little while, and then
It
it
takes
kind of finally like picks up a bit once they start talking about the trip to Ireland, and her neighbor talks her into it. And the reason that Agatha goes on this trip, she doesn't really want to go on it at first, but Agatha has secretly had a pen pal in Ireland for the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
So she wants to go and meet him.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because the book starts, right? Stephen's not even born yet. And then it doesn't feel like you move several years in the future, but you do.
Yeah, the thing is that there's a lot of time jumps in the first third of the book where
Mm-hmm.
you just kind of like move through, particularly Janet's life.
Yeah.
Agatha watches her, she has Stephen, and then she meets Randy, and then they get married, and then they've been married for about a year by the time this happens, and Stephen is 4 by the end of the book.
Yeah. Which is kind of wild because I didn't even think about that till just now, but it actually does span a good chunk of time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a short period of time. It's at least 4 years, I guess, give or
Mm-hmm.
take.
But yeah, so Agatha starts writing this guy because she sees him write in a letter in response to an article, and she likes what he said and agrees with him, but also wants to I forget exactly. Was she just pointing out something in his logic or something when they first?
Um,
It's been a little
I
while since I read the beginning.
cannot remember.
But basically, she responds to him from his, which is all another wild thing. Like this magazine or whatever she was reading it in had his address, I guess, or at least his enough contact information that she was able to write a letter to him.
Yeah.
And like that's not a thing anymore.
No, well, okay, so I started working at the newspaper in town, and I was talking to my boss, and like I have to go and report on like court and like traffic reports and stuff.
Mhm.
And you we could still do this, but we used to print full names and addresses for people who like went to court or were involved in like traffic issues and stuff. Because
Really?
yeah, because the paper used to do that. They
Huh?
would just print that information because technically it's all public record. Like
True.
anybody can go to the courthouse or whatever in your town and like the police department and stuff and look at these reports because they're public,
Hmm.
which include everybody's addresses and full names and stuff. And it's so weird.
It's weird to think about. Yeah, because you
Yeah,
think
but
that like
when
private.
that happened, when she was able to contact him, I didn't even think anything of it because I was like, oh well, yeah,
Oh,
papers used to print a lot more personal information. So this magazine and stuff, I was like, yeah, I feel like that would be
huh?
realistically there. It's very
Okay.
bizarre. Like I said,
Yeah.
you can still technically do that, but most papers choose not to
Mm,
post that information publicly.
yeah. So they start this correspondence, and so one of the big things in Agatha's life is she's very religious. So the school that she was teaching at was a Catholic school, and she kind of disapproves of the more progressive direction that the church was taking in the 80s. And I'm Catholic, so I already, I have my own ideas about the Catholic Church and all of that, and it was all very familiar to me. But I was kind of curious as to your take on it, Corey, because I know that you said kind of the twist in the book, which I don't. Do we want to spoil it or no?
Um, let's not for now and see if it comes up again later.
Okay.
The twist is a very Catholic-y twist.
Yes. Which I was like, huh. So if you're reading this as a non-Catholic, it's not probably as big of a thing.
No, it wasn't. It took me a little bit to figure out like what the issue was.
Yeah.
I guess
Because.
from my perspective, I did really relate to Agatha because what the Catholic Church went through, I guess, in this time period is similar to what a lot of Protestant churches are going through now. Protestant meaning non-Catholic. So, because there's a ton of stuff about like progressive Christianity and things like that. And so I was still able to really see her perspective on
Hmm.
things because it felt relevant to me, even though like the specifically Catholic things I didn't necessarily fully understand, but I was
Hmm.
like, I understand how she's like getting these impressions from what's going on, and I understand why she feels the way that she does because I could relate it kind of to stuff going on now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was interesting because they kind of juxtaposed the church in Staggerford with the church in Ireland and the differences between those two fairly different places. And
Mhm.
basically, one of the people that goes on the trip is the bishop of Agatha's diocese. And he's a younger guy. He's more progressive. He wants to make changes. He's been like shutting down parish schools and stuff because they just don't have the attendance and like the money for it. And Agatha, obviously, that distresses her some. But it's interesting because they have such good conversations, and I feel like they do come to an understanding at the end of the book.
Mhm.
And yeah, basically his idea is like what works in Ireland, like having Catholic schools that raise up priests and all of that, isn't necessarily the way that it can work in America, just because of the way the social structure is.
Mhm.
Because in Ireland, priests and clergy are very revered, and they're kind of put on this pedestal, and they're not necessarily expected to be quite so friendly and like part of the community. Whereas in most American churches, I feel like there is a push to be more connected, and like it's more of a social thing. And the priest isn't necessarily like set above. I mean, they are to an extent, but like they kind of hang out with the parishioners more, and that's not really a thing in Ireland. So that
Hmm.
was an interesting contrast for me.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you put that all in a nutshell because I think that made me fully understand all of that now. Because I did, I kind of got it, but like you learn some of these things through like just very personal, specific character things.
Hmm.
So I didn't necessarily like attribute those observations from one person to be like how it is overall
Hmm.
in the
Yeah, and
country.
And it is interesting because I have been, or I when I studied abroad in the UK, I actually did go to like a British Catholic mass, and it is, it's still the mass, so it's very similar around the world wherever you go. But it definitely was the priest was a little more formal than a lot of the priests in America. So it does seem like it reflects reality to me anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting because you went semi recently, so seems
Hmm.
like might still be that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it really does have to do with like
The
just the
history.
social, yeah, the history of it, and like just the way people are. Like people in Britain are just a little bit more reserved,
Mhm.
and at the same time they know more about each other almost, I feel like, than Americans do. But that's a
Americans,
little speculative.
yeah, yeah. Americans like their space,
Hmm.
their privacy, and also America was founded for the freedom to worship God the way they wanted to. So I
Hmm.
feel like the history of religion in European countries is a little bit more formalized,
Hmm.
whereas the history of religion in America is a little less formal in that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
There's
we
more
didn't start that way.
experimentation going on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like a lot. I mean, obviously the tenets and stuff are all the same. It's
Mhm.
just the more conventions, I guess, are shifted.
Yeah. Mm,
So,
I don't know what else to talk about this book. Like it's just really it's really hard because it is so slow. And I kept saying to myself and to Charlotte over and over again, I was like, I don't hate this book, but
mhm,
it was difficult for me to read it because it was just really plotting. It's very much, I mean, it's called The Green Journey, and it's very much about the journey. It is not about the destination
yeah,
because the twist happens, and then there's a lot of book left after
yep,
that point. And it's just kind of the characters, like, obviously, it's the falling action and all of that. So they are just dealing with this information that was revealed. And that's fine. It's just after the twist and the initial reaction to it, I was kind of like, wow, I just realized that I don't have anything else to care about currently in this book.
Like that was it.
Yeah,
Can
I
I
got
just
up to that point and then I was like, okay, I'm done with the book, but the book is not done with me.
there were a lot of like emotional moments, emotional beats happening throughout the book, and that's more like what it used as plot, I guess I would say,
Yeah.
which doesn't make for a page turner because it's not like, none of these characters are ever in mortal danger or,
Nope.
or even in,
No.
I mean, Randy and Janet's relationship is a little bit rocky, but
Yeah, there were a couple moments where I was like, oh, is something like going to happen? Because there are several moments where each of them individually have like, I guess, chances to like cheat in their
mm-hmm,
marriage. And because their marriage has been a little bit rocky, you're like, oh, will they?
mm-hmm.
I guess this is a spoiler. They don't
We
the
already
whole
talked about
time.
the ending where they're reuniting, so.
Yeah, they don't. And like I am glad that they don't. And I did appreciate like that tension
Mm-hmm.
of thinking about that. But then at the same time, there were some things that happened that I was like, this would be extremely awkward
Yeah,
if this happened today.
yeah.
Like Janet hangs out with this one guy in Ireland and she accidentally hangs out with him alone, which
Mm-hmm.
she had not intended. But
Yeah.
then they go for like a really short trip because she's like, I'm uncomfortable. I want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't say it that way, but she makes it clear that she didn't want to hang out with him alone.
Mm-hmm.
So they come back and then that evening the whole group of them go to his play and he comes out and he kisses her on the mouth
Yeah.
before he goes in. And Agatha doesn't say anything about that. She's just like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then
Mm.
it's never mentioned
Yeah.
or like
Just
thought
let
of
go.
again. And I was like, I was
You
trying to
know she's
think.
married.
Yeah, and I was like, this is really like bizarre. And like Janet doesn't I don't know if we even get Janet's perspective after that point.
No, I don't think we.
So it was just really weird because I was like, why is that detail included, first of all? And second of all, why is nothing like really said about it? Agatha's literally just like, oh, that's weird. And then
Yeah.
she moves on and she doesn't think about it again. And I don't know
Janet,
if it really is just like a culture thing that it's just 1980s Ireland to 2022 America is just bizarre or what. But that like
it has been
that was
40 years.
yeah. Wow, it
Yeah.
has.
Janet
So
could have
yeah,
smacked him, in my
yeah,
opinion.
she could have done something, but she doesn't. She doesn't do anything. Which Janet's pretty passive anyway. I was
Mm-hmm.
actually kind of surprised that she was as assertive as she is by the end. I think she grows.
Mm-hmm.
Janet probably grows the most as a character.
Yeah.
Agatha probably goes through the most emotional turmoil and
Mm-hmm.
comes out the other side better for it. But I think Janet is the one that grew the most as like an overall person throughout the book.
Yeah, because I mean, she starts the book as like she's very determined. She's come to terms with being a single mother, but there's basically this incident at the hospital where the first baby born on New Year's is supposed to get a prize,
Hmm.
and there's another woman in the hospital whose dad is he like a businessman or something?
Yeah, he's the businessman that owns the shop that sponsors that prize.
Yes. Yeah, and so it's his wife who's
His
also in
daughter.
there, or yeah, his daughter, yeah, who's
Mhm.
giving birth, and Janet gives birth first, should get the prize. Well, instead, the next day they look in the paper and it says that that man's daughter won it.
Yeah.
And Janet's just gonna let it go. She's like, whatever.
Mhm.
And then Agatha's like, what? No, you had your baby first. Like, it was the New Year's baby.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Agatha ends up being the one to stand up to them, and then they claim like, oh well, she's an unmarried mother, so she shouldn't get the prize. And Agatha's like, it doesn't say that anywhere in any of the
Yeah.
rules. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That moment made me really like Agatha. That was
Yes.
probably
I
uh,
really liked Agatha for that too.
yeah. But in that moment, Janet wasn't willing to stand up for herself. She was just gonna be
Mhm.
like, well, that's I don't need the prize anyway.
Even though she did. She was
She
in a
did.
very she's Janet's and her family are very poor. It's her, her dad, and her two sisters that
Mm-hmm.
live on the farm. Their mother is deceased, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's been raised by a single father who makes very little money off of his farm and all of this. So she's very poor. She really needs it. And Agatha knows that she needs the prize for
Mm-hmm.
this, but Janet just kind of is like, no, it's fine. Which Janet's 17 at that point.
Yeah.
So she is a literal child. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
she goes through the most development because she actually is like she goes from 17 to what 22-ish because
22,
Steven's
yeah.
4. And realistically,
It is.
that makes her grow up because she gets married in that time. She moves out of her parents' home. She's living on her own with her husband, adjusting to that. So, but
Yeah.
she is way more
And
assertive for the end.
but kudos to the author for making that change pretty clear and realistic.
Yeah, because she is kind of passive. It's one of the negative traits that Agatha talks about. Because we get
Mm-hmm.
mostly the first third-ish of the book is purely Agatha's point of view.
Yeah.
And then we start switching into Janet, right?
Janet and
And
Randy.
then
And then we
no,
get a
Randy
little
doesn't come
action.
till later, does he?
Oh,
Does he?
really?
Is he that early in?
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of Randy, but it might just be because I didn't like reading his parts of the book. So.
I think Randy was later because I think we got the bishop also gets a point of view shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe those only happened once we were in Ireland, because then they're kind of like Randy's your view back into Minnesota life.
Yeah, like what's going on there and everything. Which he is really realistically portrayed with depression.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody could read that book, and if they knew anything, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, he's clearly depressed."
Yeah, which is why it was hard to read.
Yeah. Well, it's
Because you're
especially
just like,
difficult because he has so many moments where he's like, "Oh, I could do this," and then he like gets kind of happy, like he's gonna make his life better, and then he realizes that it's not gonna be as good as he thinks it is, or one detail falls through, and he's like, "Oh," and then all just kind of comes crashing down around him.
yep,
Very realistic portrayal of depression.
yeah. He loses interest or he psychs himself out, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's just sad.
Yeah.
But like we said, he's good with Steven. He's trying to be good to Janet. Like,
Mhm. He's not. He doesn't get. He falls into depressive episodes that are like way worse before we ever get his perspective, and like
true.
but then once we start getting his perspective, it seems like he's very functional by that point.
Yeah.
Like Janet doesn't mind leaving him alone with Steven and stuff
Hmm.
because he still takes care of Steven. He gets out of bed in the morning. He mostly goes to his job. You know,
Yeah.
he's not laying in bed for 12 hours a day because he can't get himself to move. It's not that far.
And can I just say that his parents weren't really any help for him?
No, nobody's really any help for him. I mean, even Janet, as well meaning as she was, she just clearly didn't have the knowledge
Mm-hmm.
to deal with it. She'd just be like, it's okay, Randy. Like, chin up, be
Mm-hmm.
happy. Like, have you tried being happy? And it's like, she's definitely the most understanding person
Mm-hmm.
for him. Like, she's not like, she's always like trying to do things for his own good, but she's
Yeah.
not like forcing him to be
Yeah, she
happy
doesn't.
or anything. She's just like, oh, I wish you could stay happy for longer. Like, and she
Mm-hmm.
does blame herself for a little
Yeah.
bit too. She's like, maybe it's my fault that, Randy's sad all the time. But I mean, it's obviously not.
Yeah. Yeah, it just kind of seems like this was just definitely written before mental health was really talked about. So they all just kind of Randy's just like that.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And you're like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
It is a weird step into the past in some ways with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh yeah, and that's also why, like, if we were growing up in the 80s, we would probably be much happier with the ending because we might not have the education we have
Yeah.
about depression and mental health problems. So we might be like, oh, good, he's not gonna be so melancholy anymore. He's not gonna be a lazy, sad person.
Yeah. He sold a house. He did
But
it.
yeah, but it's like, no, that doesn't just magically make him better. Like Janet is probably his best resource. And that I think why we wanted them to be reunited because
Mhm.
Janet is the thing that like matters the most in his life,
Yeah.
and she's arguably the best character for him
Mhm.
in that regard. But yeah, his parts were like difficult to read at times though.
Yeah.
And I think it was a lot of that, just the knowledge that this book was old enough that I was like, yeah, he is not going to get any help.
Mhm.
Like he's not going to get any real help. So it felt very like weird to read his
Yeah.
perspective because of that. And then it was just weird to read his perspective in general because he's not that interesting of a character.
Mhm. Yeah, because he is suffering from like apathy essentially, so that makes
Yeah.
him a hard character to be interesting.
Yes.
I guess he was kind of a good foil for Agatha in a way though, because she's suffering maybe not from depression, but she is kind of realizing that she's chosen to spend her life alone, right? She never got married.
Hmm.
She had a guy who she maybe could have gotten married to, but like just didn't go that direction. And like she's been happy with her life, but like in this book, she is starting to feel like there's not much point in teaching anymore, and she's kind of like looking back on her legacy and like thinking, did I do enough? Did I make good decisions with how my life went, you know?
Hmm.
And I feel like they're both kind of struggling with it in a different way of like what makes a meaningful life and like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All the characters in this book have like similarities and differences that make them really good to play off of each other in those ways.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of parallels. And then there's just like the bishop. He's not struggling with anything.
He's struggling with getting priests for Minnesota.
Yeah, like that's his biggest struggle, which is like a very like straightforward like issue.
Mhm.
And it's like cuz he doesn't necessarily like Agatha is struggling with the church progressing,
Mhm.
but the bishop really isn't. You know,
Yeah.
he seems to really know what he's doing, or at least he feels very secure in his decisions.
Mhm.
Like he's never really conflicted about how he's like shutting down the schools and like changing things and stuff like that. He's really not. He's just like, "Yep, this is what we're doing because I think it's the right thing to do."
Mhm.
And then he
Yeah.
does it. Which I guess
He's
I admire in a way. He's the most secure character.
he
Like he is
is as you're
definitely
saying that.
the
Mhm.
only one who's like very minorly conflicted about anything.
Yeah, he's confident in his choices and he feels like more his job in the book is to convince other people to come around to his way of seeing things.
Yeah, which he's pretty good at.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we going to give away the twist now or
Okay, well,
that's
I guess spoiler warnings. I mean, I
well,
don't
we can do our
necessarily
star
recommend
rating
this book.
first.
Oh, okay. I was going back and forth between a 2 and a 3. I think I settled on 3 because I think it's just another one of those it's personally not for me books, but it's not a bad book.
Mm. Yeah, I gave it a 3.5.
I haven't actually written my review on it yet,
Oh,
but I should.
you should. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't know that it was like right up my alley or anything. But I did really like the descriptions of Ireland. For me,
Mhm.
there was a real sense of place there, probably partly because I have been to Scotland, which is has a similar vibe. And I liked his characterizations, and I liked Agatha. I mean, yeah, so I liked it. I didn't like love it.
Yeah, and see, I'm in the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm like, I didn't hate it, but I wouldn't say I liked it either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I do know
It
what
was
you mean.
just kind of like, I mean, if I hadn't had to sit to report on court on Tuesday,
Hmm.
there's a lot of downtime. If you ever go to like the public court sessions in your municipality, bring a book because the judge and the lawyers will like leave and come back, and you never quite know how long they're going to be gone. So I sat in the courtroom from 9 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, almost 1:30, and I was probably alone for like 80% of that.
Oh, jeez.
So I finished this book.
Nice. Good use of
Uh,
time.
yeah, so I'm glad that I brought it because I wouldn't have had anything else to do. But if I hadn't had that time, I don't know that I would have finished by today
Oh
for us
my
to record
gosh.
because I would have had a hard time with that. So the point is that I needed a great deal of time to get through it.
It's better than boredom.
Yeah,
What a
that's
glowing rating.
it's a glowing review, honestly. Like I said, it's still not bad. I like the descriptions in it too. It's just like you start reading it, you're like, oh, I like some of these descriptions. They're like weirdly poetic and kind of not necessarily. I'm trying to think of a word. It's similar to like irreverent, but not quite that because they're
Hmm.
not like gross or mean. They're like
It's just
inadvertently
very,
mean sometimes,
yeah,
where they're
it's
just
very
like,
raw.
yeah. And like I started reading it and I was like, oh, these are really interesting. But then you get so far and you're like, wow, can we not have like 6 paragraphs of backstory for a character that we are literally never going to see again?
Hmm.
But the backstory is integral to like the feeling, like the vibe of the book.
Yeah.
So we have it for everyone,
Hmm.
despite it being not interesting really at all.
Yeah, including like the people who run the hotel in Ireland.
Yeah, and I'm just like, do I need to know all this stuff? Like, what? I did. Okay, there was one like really funny part when they first get to Ireland and they start talking to the really boring family, and the dad comes home or the husband, and you get his perspective very briefly, just like in the narrative, where he's like, ah, I can't believe I had to come home. Now I have to talk to these people about things, and like I really hate this. I wish I could just go upstairs. I don't want to discuss things. He works at the paper,
Hmm.
and so he's like, man, I'm gonna have to discuss this case again, and it's gonna be really annoying, and I don't want to deal with guests, but blah blah blah. And then he sits down and he immediately just launches into a long explanation and he just talks constantly for the rest of the conversation. And every time you see him after that, he brings up that case in the
Hmm.
paper and he just keeps talking about it. And I thought that was so funny. That was the funniest part of the whole book for me. It was hilarious. I was like, wow, this is perfect.
Yeah, that was a good moment of like, yep, this is how it happens. Internally, you're like, I'm not gonna, I don't want to do that, and then you just do it.
Yep. And he like is really into it too, which I thought
Mhm.
was really hilarious. That was the
Yeah.
best. Okay. Are you gonna share the
Yes.
twist?
Okay, so the twist. So James and Agatha's letters have been very personal, right? Like they've been very open with each other. And Agatha is definitely kind of has a crush type thing, but they've never met in person, obviously. They've
Hmm.
sent like some photos and stuff. And so she meets him and they go out to dinner and it's nice and, all of
They
that. But
chat. They
yeah,
really hit it off. They're
they
really
do.
good together.
Yeah, they have good chemistry. Yeah, but then at the end of the night, she's like, okay, so we're going to meet for church tomorrow because it's going to be Sunday. And he was like, actually, I don't think I can do that. And I can't see you again for the next couple days. And like Agatha's whole plan, partially, I mean, she said to the rest of the tour group that she was going to look up her roots in Ireland because she has Irish ancestors. And she was going to do that, but she was also going to like hang out with James and like have him show her around and stuff.
Yeah, that
So
was the real reason that she wanted to go to Ireland anyway, was really to meet him.
yes. Yeah. So they get there and that happens and she's like, "Okay, well, she knows the church that he goes to because he's talked about it before." And
Hmm.
so she just is like, I want to know why he's being like this. Like I'm going to go to that church with him. So she goes there on her own and he's the priest.
Dun
He
dun dun.
There it is. He's the priest of
Yep.
this church. And so yeah, she just gets up and leaves, which I loved.
Yeah. She's just like, oh, bye.
Literally just gets up and leaves. She's like, I can't.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
I
and
thought it was great because I'm not Catholic, so it took me longer than it should have because I have enough Catholic friends in my life that I should have picked up on it right away. But I was like, why is she so upset? Which, like, I knew that she was, like, had to be upset because he never told her that he
Mhm.
was a priest or anything. But I was like, what's the problem here? And then we're like, oh, yeah, they can't get married. They can't, like,
They can't
be, like,
have a
dating
relationship.
and stuff like that. Like, they can't have a romantic relationship because he can't have that
Hmm.
because he's a priest. And I was like, oh, duh.
Yep, celibacy. That's the plot
Yep.
twist.
Yeah. I was like, okay.
um, yeah, I don't know. It was a great moment for me because I was like, "Oh no."
It was a good twist. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect because up until that point, like from the time that she starts hanging out with James, like in Ireland, up until that point, I was like starting to get suspicious because the way the characterization is just really good.
Hmm.
Where like you can tell through the writing and through Agatha's perspective that like he's clearly hiding something, even though she's not necessarily reading into it that much.
Yeah.
She's like picking up some of the details, but not. She's not sitting there like, oh, he's clearly hiding something from me. I have to find out what it is. She's more like, oh, I'm having a harder time reading him than I thought I would.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
that's okay. Like maybe he's just a little more difficult to read. But then when he like ditches her, I was immediately like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like ultra
Yeah.
suspicious of him from the very start because of the way he was acting.
Yeah, and then it's hilarious because everyone, not everyone, but Janet knows that she's there to meet James. Janet's the only one who knows. And then Janet ends up just telling the bishop because the bishop is like, "Where did Agatha go? Like what is going on?"
Yeah.
Uh,
Also, Janet, absolutely a great wingman.
mhm.
She was so good because it takes a little while for the bishop to get her to tell him, but the
Yep.
way that she covered for Agatha was just like top tier.
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolute girl boss.
Great friend. Yep. Yeah. So the bishop ends up going to confront James, and that was also really funny. Did you
It
like
was.
that part?
Yeah, it was really funny. Let's leave that part left
Yeah, that
alone. So
that
people will go read this book because that was hilarious. I loved
yeah.
it.
Yeah. But, so this was my theory. This is why I wanted to bring it up. I was almost theorizing that maybe the bishop was going to convince James to come to America.
You know what? Me too. I also thought that. I thought that maybe he would just volunteer to
Mm-hmm.
come back to America because he seemed to really want something else and he understands, like you explained, the differences between how the clergy are perceived in Ireland versus in America, and it seemed like he wanted
Mm-hmm.
that he wanted to be an American priest, not an Irish priest, because he felt like he could get more connected and feel closer to people in his parish that way. And so I thought for sure that he was going to be like, you know what, I'll just go
Yeah.
since he needs priests. I'll volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
but he
But no,
doesn't.
I get it could have gone either way because it's like he does talk about like
Hmm.
not knowing anything else and being really connected to the land and how in Ireland it's like a big deal if you like move a couple cities. But yeah, but that would have been the more exciting ending would have been James comes to America with them. Although
Yeah,
maybe he doesn't want to be. I mean, him and Agatha pretty much make up at the end, so
yeah. Like they're friends again. I
yeah.
liked that she wasn't like all fired ready to like talk to him again
Hmm.
immediately because it's not like it's a 2 week trip and basically it's the end of the first week when he's like I'm not going to see you anymore and then it's that Sunday. So she still has like another week in Ireland. So towards
Hmm.
the end of that week just before they're leaving is when they kind of like actually talk to each other again.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Can we still write letters?" Cuz they were like they were something that he like really held dear.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, and she was like, "You know what? Yes, but let me write first."
Yep.
So she has to decide when she's ready to start talking to him again.
Which I think was a good way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because yeah, he did lie to her. I mean, he was honest about everything he was saying, but the omission was pretty big.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Cuz he told her that he was also a teacher, which
Hmm.
like is not
It's true.
100% inaccurate, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a lie by omission, so it's a lie
It's scheming.
nonetheless. It
Hmm.
was really funny when the bishop shows up And James is like, wow, the one indiscretion, and now I have a bishop like on my doorstep yelling at me about it. Which
Yep.
the Bishop Baker does not yell at him.
No.
He takes the time to talk to him and understand like him. Baker just really wanted to make sure that Agatha was not being scammed
Yeah.
by someone or like taken advantage of. And as soon as he finds that out and he's satisfied that James is not a bad person, and this was the only thing that James really like lied about, then he's like, okay, it's fine. And Agatha does not, to our knowledge, find out that Bishop Baker ever went and talked to James.
No. Yeah. That's kept completely quiet. So.
I mean, well, maybe she would have been suspicious because James gives her a letter at the end to give to Bishop Baker.
Mm.
But
Oh,
you
well,
know,
she knows they saw each other, but not that they talked about her.
yeah, and she knows that he's there to like talk to clergy and like talk to people, so it's not out of the realms of possibility. He's not that far away from where they are staying. James isn't. His church isn't. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, good stuff.
It was a journey.
It was.
Title was accurate. It gets points
Yes,
for that.
100%, absolutely accurate. Would I recommend this book? I don't think I would recommend this book to anyone but like a very select few people. This is another one of those books that's like, I have to know a lot about your reading style and your habits to
Mm-hmm.
recommend this.
Do you think
I
your
don't,
mom would like it?
um, maybe.
Because
I don't
my
know.
mom.
I don't know if it has enough plot for her, honestly, because my
Mm,
mom, I mean, she reads Amish romance novels
mm,
fairly often, but they need to have like something. She complains often when they don't have like enough plot outside of just the relationship.
oh,
So I think she and I have similar styles of reading, I suppose.
interesting. Yeah, because part of the reason that I ended up picking this book, I think my mom gave me this book. If she didn't, I don't know how I got it. I don't remember picking it up basically, but she really liked it, and my aunt really liked it. So I was also just kind of wondering if it's like, you know, maybe for older
Yeah,
women.
well, she might have. I mean, my parents would probably be able to relate to a few more things than I did. They would have known more about the era. But then
Hmm.
they're not really like connected to Ireland and they're not Catholic, so
Yeah.
they might not be the audience for it.
Yep.
All right, well, that was a green journey. Did we do an icebreaker at the beginning?
Nope.
No, we didn't do it again. Listen, we're really bad at chatting, okay? Charlotte and I just want to talk about the book, so if you're
we
here
we
for anything
chat
else,
we chat in the middle.
we do. Honestly, we go on tangents. Not constantly. We do try to stay on topic, but we go on enough tangents. We
Hmm.
talk about things. All I've been doing with my time since I started at the paper is working at the paper and then playing Skyrim. Gotten really into it.
All I've been doing is watching Disney Plus because I got a 1 month subscription that ends this weekend. So
That sounds fun.
it is, and honestly, it's
Watch
been fun.
72
And
more hours.
to tie it in, I've been watching Daredevil, which he's a Catholic superhero. So
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that.
it's
I've been getting more into Skyrim. There's tons of religion in Skyrim. It's all very bizarre. I
yeah.
just got attacked at a shrine of Talos because the Empire outlawed worship of Talos,
Mm,
and I had to go drop something off at one of his shrines, which is a secret shrine because obviously it's outlawed.
hmm.
And then there was some Thalmor there, and they were like, "You can't worship Talos." And I was like, "I'm not.
Please just let me leave.
I'm just dropping this off for a friend.
Wow.
I'm sorry." That's okay. My
Struggle.
dog killed them.
Your dog killed them?
I have a dog right now. Yes, because
Oh.
I started a quest and he's a follower. And I thought I wouldn't like him because I don't usually like having followers, but he's great because he's immortal too, and you can't
Oh,
kill him. So he's extremely useful.
sounds like a very good best friend to have.
Yeah, except he's also loud because he barks all the time. So
Oh.
I can't do my stealth archer build very well,
Mm,
which would make sense. I don't know if you even know what that means, but
nope.
if you play Skyrim, you'll know exactly what I mean. Because you can't play Skyrim not as a stealth archer at least once.
Well,
Uh,
I think this is that you can definitely bring up Skyrim as an actual icebreaker next time because it'll tie in
okay.
really well with the book we're going to read.
Oh yeah. Okay, so the next book, I guess I'll give my intro because it's my pick. We are going to read Graceling by Kristen. I thought it was Christina. Kristen Kashore. There is actually a show or movie tie-in that
Really?
is supposed to exist for this book and series. This is Graceling is part of a series, but it is technically a standalone. All the books in the series are standalone. They just take place in the same world. So Graceling is the first one. And actually the last book, the fourth book is new. It's pretty new. As of I think last year. So, but yeah, it is a fantasy YA. So it will fit into Skyrim. Maybe I'll name my next playthrough after the main character in this. Just kidding. I actually hate her name.
Spoilers.
Charlotte and I have both read this book before, but we both read it in high school, so it has been a minute. So there's a map on the inside. So should be fun. I want to see if I like it as much as I liked it the first time that I read it, and Charlotte will also see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was A Green Journey. I gave it 3 stars. Charlotte gave it 3.5. I don't recommend it. I think Charlotte would probably find more people to recommend this to.
Yeah.
But tune in maybe next month. I'm currently behind on putting these out into the world, so hopefully we don't have any rabid fans who need that. Because this will probably be much later, but whatever. It works. It'll get out there eventually. All right. See you guys in the next one. Bye.
Bye.